Hello, hi, how are you? Bonjour, buenos dias, ¿cómo estás? Hello, hey. So, this video is about the basic question that has been brought to my attention that a lot of Christians ask about if I sin, if I do bad things, if I mess up, then maybe I'm not really a Christian. Maybe I really didn't have salvation. Maybe I didn't become saved. And so what I want to do is take a look at that question. Now, I'm sad to say that this question is actually made worse a lot of times by ministers. I have to admit, I've heard youth ministers, drive this down the throats of their youth. And especially the youth who are the most excited to follow and serve God will be the first ones to agree with whatever the youth minister says. But there is this idea that we can look at people and look at how they're living in their life and judge them about being a Christian or not, and we'll know if they were a Christian or not. And then they use Bible verses to back that up, but they just remember parts of the verse and ignore other parts, or basically just, I hate to say it as bluntly, pretty much lie or selectively forget the whole verse or the verse right before it or the verse after it, so that they can kind of twist it into their sort of agenda. And in some cases, I don't think it's not so much malicious. I think it really is just a stupid idea that has a life of its own and spreads to other people, and no one ever fact checks it. So what we're going to do is a little fact checking. And so what people say is, Jesus said that you recognize a tree by its fruit, and a good tree bears good fruit, and a bad tree bears bad fruit. And I heard a young Christian man say this years and years and years ago, and he said, but can a Christian mess up? And the guy looked at him and said, well, you don't pick figs from an apple tree, do you? You don't pick grapes from a peach tree, So in other words, he's saying whatever you are, that's what you'll produce. So if you're a Christian, you'll produce good works, and if you're not a Christian, you'll produce bad works. That's not really biblical, because the Bible is filled with examples like where Christians might mess up sometimes. And so it's not so clear. And John says in John chapter 2, I write you this so that you will not sin. But if you do sin, know that you can confess your sins to God and find forgiveness. So a Christian is not someone who's perfect, who never sins. And I think most of us understand that. We're going to move past that. But the question is, well, how many sins disqualify me, from being a Christian? Because the thing is, if you became a Christian, like what it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, I am now a new creation. Christ lives in me, The old is gone and the new has come. Christ makes all things new. That He's changed me fundamentally, and that He's changing me. So what Philippians 1:6 says is that He who began a good work in you will complete it and bring it to completion into the day of Christ Jesus, will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus. That this is a process of sanctification, of becoming more and more and more like Christ. Paul goes on and talking with the Galatian believers and how they're Christians and they start out, but they got off track, and he's coming in to correct them. He says the same thing to pretty much all the letters he writes to his churches, that y'all started out good, but y'all got off track, and I'm writing you this letter to get you back on track. Hebrews talks about this, that the people, whoever was writing that, wrote, he said, y'all haven't matured enough in the faith, or maybe y'all have gotten off track somewhere. And so it's a process of maturity, becoming more like Christ. And if Christ is really God, then maybe that process will take forever. So let's look at the verses that get abused. We'll start with Matthew 12. Because there's only 3 passages I could find using the Google machine and all that stuff. And, I just looked up the word fruit on Bible Gateway in the NIV, and these are the only three that came up, okay, other than the references that didn't have anything to do with it. And these are all words of Jesus. So right here in Matthew 12:33, he says, "Make a tree good, and its fruit will be good, or make a tree bad, and its fruit will be bad. For a tree is recognized by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks." So there he's talking about recognizing what they are by their fruit. But again, here he's talking about the Pharisees, and he's talking about demons. And the thing is, what he's talking about is they have criticized Jesus and said that he works miracles because he is a demon. And he works miracles by the power of Satan. And so he goes through this long argument. And this is where he makes the strong man argument. He says, how can Satan defeat Satan? I cast out demons. I cast out all demons. So how can I be a demon? I would be, that's one thing he says. He says, I have to be stronger than the demon to cast out the demons. But then he goes on and says, look at my life. I live a good life. So you can recognize me by that. And then he talks about them and he says, they are not so good. I think this is where he calls them a brood of vipers. They've been saying some nasty things about him, saying that he's demon-possessed. You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks. The good man brings forth good things out of the good stored up in him, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. But I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. So in other words, the idea there is if there's been a change inside you, then good will come out of you. But the important thing we have to understand is, I'm a Christian, but I'm becoming more and more like Christ over time, so how much good should I be? How many, how much like Jesus should I be at, 1 year after I'm a Christian, or 2 years? How do we put a real assessment on that so that we can go around picking out who really became a Christian and who's faking, So that's the thing. He's talking to the Pharisees, who were the religious teachers of their day. So, recognizing false teachers is not quite the same question as recognizing just if someone's a Christian. Do you see that difference? And I think this is the point that I want to make most strongly, is what people abuse about this passage. Let's look at probably the most famous passage. Matthew 7, and starting in verse 15, he says, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown in the fire. Thus by their fruit you will recognize them." So he's talking about here false prophets. So the thing is, if someone's coming to you as a Pharisee, as a religious teacher, or if someone's coming to you as a prophet of God, then you have to make a judgment about if they're for real or not, because they're teaching you things. And so you have to decide if you agree with what they're teaching you or not. Especially if they're a prophet of God. If they are prophesying, then what they say is a direct revelation from God. And if they're a teacher, that would probably mean like they're interpreting revelations from God, or teaching you, figuring out the specifics, deducing. And so Jesus applies this to the Pharisees, and he seems to bring up, recognize someone by their fruit, and he applies it to the false prophets. But there's no command in here that we as Christians are supposed to go around figuring out if everyone else is a Christian. Okay, and so without that command, then we can't make this assessment and say, well, this person committed this many sins, so they're not a Christian. And, as a teenager coming up, I heard that a lot. I heard a lot of people say, if someone's in a homosexual relationship, then they're not really a Christian, because that sin, somehow worse. And you're like, well, why is that sin worse than, lying? And why is that sin worse than this sin? And why is that sin worse than this sin? And then they say, well, it's because it's a lifestyle. It's the style of their life. Well, A, you didn't base that off anything biblical. And B, all of us have a lifestyle of sin. If you really get down to the nitty gritty of really trying to follow Jesus, anger, lusting after a woman, any kind of selfishness or pride, can you honestly say that that's not a continual problem? You might be doing better, but it's always there. So, yeah. And then if you look in 1 Corinthians 3, Paul talks about the wise and the foolish builders, right? And in 1 Corinthians 3, what he says is, if you, he comes in, he's saying if you build a house, and the house represents, Jesus Christ and your life as a Christian, then the foundation of the house is Jesus Christ. And if you come in, and I'm Paul, I come in and told y'all about Jesus, y'all got converted. If someone came afterwards and was your teacher, maybe he built on the foundation with good stuff, or maybe you built on the foundation with hey, in the end of your life, there's going to be a fire, and everything's going to be destroyed. And he said, if you build nothing good on the foundation of Jesus Christ, you will be saved, but as a man escaping through a fire, and that nothing in your life will mean anything in the end. But if you build something awesome in your life and really follow Jesus, then the day will show, the fire will prove the awesomeness of what you did. Okay, so you get the idea there. He seems to think that, yes, someone could go their whole life and just really mess up as a Christian. It seems unlikely. But the point is it's not so much about whether or not a Christian will, mess up at all. The question is how much. Because if you don't know how much, then you can't say, well, I've sinned this much, so that means I'm not a Christian. Because if you don't know how much sin or you should be at this point, and how much holiness you should be at this time in your life, then how can you make an assessment based on that whether or not you're a Christian? Hopefully that makes sense. And so Jesus, says, well, you can assess a tree by its fruit, but he makes that only in reference to assessing false teachers, to assessing false prophets. And what the Bible says is, everyone who believes in Jesus is not condemned. It's not about believing in Jesus doesn't mean that you're doing good things. It just means that you're accepting the gift of forgiveness and trusting that God's forgiven you, which is very different. And so the idea with being a Christian is you may mess up a whole lot, okay, but it's all about forgiveness for people who don't deserve anything good. And so if we can talk a little bit, as a Christian, the whole reason you became a Christian and the whole reason Jesus Christ died for you is because you're a sinner. And so what Christians tend to do is they tend to turn it into karma after they become a Christian. I've heard people say, becoming a Christian is the easiest thing ever, but life after that's the hardest thing ever, Christianity doesn't start with being saved by Jesus Christ's death on the cross, and then after that it's all about your hard work. It has to always be about Jesus Christ's death on the cross. And that's the only reason you have any good standing before God at all, ever. Okay, and Jesus is not going to say, well, you didn't follow me hard enough, so I'm going to take it away, because he gave it to you because you were a sinner. But on top of that, you can't make an assessment about just how good you're supposed to be at a certain point, because there's no assessment given. And a real problem enters in when we try to make those assessments, when we try to say, because some churches, some Christian denominations have done this. They've come in and said, like the Campbellites, so Church of Christ or Christian Church, they say, you have to be baptized. And if you're baptized, then that means you're really a Christian. And you have to get baptized, and at that moment, that's like the first good work that you do of obedience. The second that you get saved, you have to get saved at the same time that you get baptized, and it happens at the same time. And the problem with that is easy believism. So as soon as we come in and we make a specific rule, anyone who really got saved will do this, 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 and this. Then that's easy to fake, isn't it? Because then all you gotta do is just do this, 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 and this, and like it doesn't work because that's easy believism. You don't really, do you really believe it? And so the reality is it works better the way the Bible does it without laying any kind of specific idea. It does say, yeah, you become a Christian, you're just going to change who you are. But it never comes in and says, the changes will be this, 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 and this. Because then all people will start doing this, 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 and this. And that's not what it's about. Jesus says, your righteousness has to be greater than that of the Pharisees. It has to be flowing from deep inside you. And this is a process where God changes you from deep inside to where you won't want to do bad things anymore. But it's a process. And so that's one reason it's a bad idea to try to make these judgments. Yeah, you have to make judgments about false prophets. Jesus was being smart there because people were calling him a demon, even though he was here to die for their sins. They were false teachers spreading false messages. And anyone who's a false prophet, of course you got to say something about that. So I just wanted to make that video because I think it's something, as people are growing up, they struggle with that, and they kind of have youth ministers who come at them and say, are you really a Christian? You committed this sin and this sin and this sin, you're not really a Christian. And that's not what the Bible says. That's unbiblical, and they the verses are about recognizing false prophets. So a young teenage girl or boy is not a prophet that we need to make all these judgments about. Okay? We don't need to, get all specific. If she sleeps around, if he fights and cusses, that doesn't mean that they're not a Christian. We can't say for sure exactly what sins, disqualify them. So I've tried to beat this point in the ground, and I hope I have. I hope whoever out there, I just saw this was a certain person I know who had struggled with this in the past, and so I thought, I think a lot of teenagers struggle with that, so that's why I made this video. I hope it makes sense. Thank you so much for your time.